Hey everyone, in this series, we're going to learn how to create our own Python server that hosts an API. If you happen to know why you'd already want that, then skip to the time code below or just follow the chapters within YouTube. But if you don't know why you'd want a server, let's go over a quick example. Well, in this older video, we went over how to make a Reddit bot using Python. Say you went a few steps further than that tutorial and you actually made a feature-rich Reddit bot that you started selling to people where they could pay a monthly fee to actually have your bot work within their subreddit. That'd be pretty sweet. But each time you got a new customer, you had to go update the bot to handle their special case. Well, after the first few customers, you'd quickly find that that just doesn't scale well. When something doesn't scale well in the programming world, it means that the software may work fine for a handful of users, or even thousands of users. But it would eventually reach a point where the software would either start to slow down or just break due to too many users using it. Well, this is a great problem to have because, hey, you have too many users. It's not something that you actually want to start affecting your paying customers because, well, they're paying you to have a good experience. One way to mitigate this would be to create a Reddit bot for each customer. But how would you store the information that the bot cares about? Well, you probably wouldn't store it in a text file like we did in the tutorial. Instead, you'd probably want to use a database. But it also wouldn't be too smart to have each bot connect to the database directly. Because again, that could just end up being error prone, and well, a database can also have only so many connections to it. Basically, it just doesn't scale that well. So one of the best ways that we can actually handle this is to create our own server. So in this video, we'll go over what is an API and how to get started making an API in Python. In later episodes, we'll get into different types of requests, tools you can use to test your API, database types, setup and implementation, and maybe even some basics for making a website with this server. So let's get into it. Okay, to start off, what is an API? API stands for Application Programming Interface, which is really just a fancy way of saying two or more computers are communicating with each other. Because you don't have two computers really attached to each other, this communication happens over the network. This means when we are testing our APIs, it won't really be available to people outside of your home or your current network. This just means that if you're at home, don't worry, you're not exposing your API necessarily to anybody. APIs are also generally structured, meaning they expect given inputs and will respond in a specific way. Let's look at the Hangman API we used in the past. So when we go to this URL, you can see that it doesn't really expect any input because we're just using this URL. This is basically how we're accessing the API. And this will make more sense once we start to actually develop our own API. But it does expect a specific output, or we can expect a specific output. In this case, it's a list with a word within the list, right? And this is what we used for Hangman. So looking through pip, there are dozens and dozens of packages that can help us with this. But we're going to use one of the most common packages called Flask. This one right here. Just pip install Flask. So if you want to go ahead and do a pip install Flask, then we can get started if you want to follow along. One of the nice things about Flask is that it's actually used by hundreds of companies for real world products. So it's safe to say that if you're starting here, you can probably go just about anywhere with it. I've got this basic file set up here. I'm going to paste some things in here as we go, and I'll go over what each thing does as I paste it in. But for now, right now we're just from Flask, we're importing Flask, and we're then creating an app using Flask, and then this underscore underscore name underscore underscore. This is just the name of the program we're currently running, but you can name this whatever you want. And then we will print running. All right, so let's paste in our first little API method. So this here is basically a function called index, and we're just going to return the string running. Now, you might notice there's this fancy @app route stuff, right? Well, this is something in Python called a decorator. A decorator basically just modifies how a function is used within Python. It wraps the function basically in a way. If you'd like to learn more about decorators, I've got a link in the description that describes that. But in this case, we're basically saying that the app.route function, which is defined within Flask, will wrap this function, meaning it will basically do a bunch of other stuff when index would be run. So we can actually go to route and see what this does. I did this by control clicking, and you can read through it all if you'd like, but you probably won't because it's like a lot of technical jargon. But really all you have to worry about is that route is just a decorator within app that allows us to pass in a string. This string is basically the path which will route to calling our index method here. A path is simply the end of a URL, but the underlying part of a URL is actually an IP address. So let's look a little more closely at each of those real quick. An IP address, or Internet Protocol address, is a set of numbers and periods that direct you to a given computer or network using the internet. That's why it's called the Internet Protocol. A common one you will see is 127.0.0.1, or I guess technically those are zeros, which is equivalent to local host, or basically your current computer. It's the same for every computer. It's always the local one. Another common one is 192.168.0.1, which is usually your router or modem for your home network. If that doesn't work, you can probably change the 0 to a 1, and that'll probably work. Once the internet was started, though, people quickly realized if you wanted to go to Google, it would be way nicer to say go to google.com rather than go to 142.251.41.46. And you can search the web. But that's in part why URLs were made. So you can map a name to an IP address. Now, a URL also has some unique parts to it. Let's look at the API we used for the Hangman game we made in this video. So this URL is https://random-word-form.herokuapp.com/random/noun. This URL has three main parts to it: a domain, a subdomain, and a path. The domain is the part you know the most. It's the main word you'd say for the website, like Google or YouTube, or in this case, Heroku app. The subdomain is the part before the domain. There can be multiple subdomains or no subdomain. In this case, it's random-work-form. Subdomains are separated by a period if you have multiple. Finally, the part we care about right now, the path. In this case, it's /random/noun. You could think of this as being a unique identifier to a particular function or even a file within a computer. Now, you might notice that if we were to run this, well, it says running and then nothing happens, right? It just stops. So the reason for this is because, well, we're running it as a Python file. And as you have probably noticed in the past, if you watched my previous tutorial series, a Python file just runs and finishes as soon as it can, right? So here, sure, we set up this whole API, but once we've set it up, we hit running, and then Python is like, okay, we've run all of the code we need to run, we're done. So what we actually have to do is we have to run this Flask app debug run. This app server is basically telling it what file to run. So it's going to run this server file. And then debug allows us to hot reload our code, which basically means that we have to run this command once. It will start running our quote unquote server. And then once it is running, if we change our code, if we make changes, it will restart the server by itself automatically. And run is just telling it to run the server. Technically, this is a server you are running. It's just a server application. It's really simple, but that's the idea. You might have to, depending on your, I'm on Windows right now. If you want to run this, you might have to type Py or Python, however you can use Python, and do Py or Python -m space, and then paste in this command. And when you go ahead and run it, then it should work. Make sure you're in the same directory as well where the server is. Cool. So we can see here, we are now running on HTTP 127.0.0.1 500. And it will restart and some other debugger information, which we don't really need to look at. So 127.0.0.1 is equivalent to localhost, or your current computer, which means that if you run this on your computer, you will see the same value here. If you run it on another computer, you will see the same value. It just means we're running it on this current computer. If we go ahead and copy this, and let's go ahead and paste this in here, we can see that we get running. Yeah, that means that we're actually running this command here. If we say subscribe, just as a little hint, if you want to, click that big red button. Maybe it's not red anymore. I don't know. They're changing so much stuff on YouTube, but okay. We go back here and we refresh. You can click the refresh button or just F5, or Command R on a Mac, or Control R on a PC. There we go. Now it says subscribe to JakeEh. Let's make it more descriptive just in case you're not sure. Perfect. So this works. Our API works. Awesome. Now let's make our API a little bit cooler here. Let's add in another option here where app.route, we're going to say hello as as part of the path, and then this name, but you can see that it's within these less than and greater than signs. Basically, this will return something based off of the input. You can see we actually have a value here, whereas index we didn't have any value. So name is defined by whatever is put within this URL, right? Because this is part of the URL, and name is defined here. So if we put Jake here, it will use Jake as a parameter, and then it will say hello, Jake. So let's go ahead and give this a shot. Let's go back to our thing here, and let's do /hello, and let's do Mike. Just, if there's a Mike out there. Oh, cool. So it says hello, Mike. What about Jason? Hello, Jason. Tyler. What about Sammy? Yeah, Sammy's kind of sitting beside me right now, so she's looking up at me. Sammy's my dog, if you were not aware. Cool. So it works. That's pretty magical. What if we don't put anything here? What if we just do hello /? Oh, it does not work. Now, why does this not work? The reason this doesn't work is because if you have a / and you don't have anything after the /, it basically means that you're just calling hello. So hello / is the same as just hello without a /. Whereas if you type hello / with something, right, like an I, then it's actually calling a different type of path. So you can see here with like this is basically the same as saying like nothing, right? But we have a / here to make it obvious that this is like the root, or like the index. If you ever read index always means like the root of something here. So like the very start of it. That's that. Now we have a working API. Sure, it's not particularly useful yet, but it's a start. Please don't forget to like and subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one. Remember, I'm Jake, you're awesome, and this has been the intro for making a Python API.